This is CBC Vancouver News.
Thank you to the voters of Langford Wanda Fuca for sending me down to the BC Legislature.
Well, the faces are new, but the ridings will stay orange. The NDP wins both of BC's by-elections. A day of delays at YVR, all because of a shortage of air traffic controllers.
I want to show my children what rich culture they have.
And celebrating rich Filipino culture in Burnaby, marking the 125th anniversary of Philippine independence. Good evening, I'm Tanya Fletcher. Well, BC's political landscape has shifted slightly tonight. Two by-elections held today mean two new MLAs will represent the NDP in Victoria. The first, the riding of Langford Wanda Fuca, where Ravi Parmar has won.
Thank you to the voters of Langford Wanda Fuca for sending me down to the BC Legislature.
Parmar took the seat with 53% of the popular vote. He celebrated the victory at his campaign headquarters alongside some very familiar faces, including Premier John Horgan, who was the predecessor of this riding, holding the seat since 2005. But Horgan stepped down in March. Today, he says voters are in good hands.
Ravi's run a very solid campaign, connecting with people all across the community. I love the guy. He's been a dear friend of mine since he was in grade 5. I've watched him grow. I've watched him campaign, and I'm looking forward to watching him become the next MLA for Langford Wanda Fuca.
Meanwhile, in the riding of Vancouver Mount Pleasant, Indigenous leader Joan Phillips has won the seat for the NDP. She says she'll have her sights set on Ottawa. Some technical difficulties there. We were going to hear from Phillip, but she says she was elected to replace former Cabinet Minister Melanie Mark, who left the legislature earlier this year. Phillip won with 68% of the popular vote. In other news today, thousands of people are expected to gather tomorrow for the funeral of slain Sikh leader Hardeep Singh Nijjar. The 45-year-old was president of the Guru Nanak Gurdwara in Surrey and was shot dead in his vehicle in the Gurdwara's busy parking lot last Sunday night. Tomorrow morning, mourners will gather at the Gurdwara for a viewing before the funeral, which will take place later in the afternoon. Homicide investigators have released few details in the case, other than that they're looking for two, quote, heavier set male suspects. Well, passengers flying into or out of Vancouver International Airport experienced some major delays today, and it's all because there weren't enough air traffic controllers. At first, YVR said there were constraints within the air navigation system. Nav Canada later confirmed that slowdown was a part of their ground delay program. It said in a statement that was triggered due to, quote, unplanned absences, adding that its training programs are at full capacity. The airport is still urging you to check the status of your flight ahead of time. On Vancouver Island, 2.5 weeks of delays are being alleviated with the reopening of Highway 4. Again, it briefly reopened yesterday, but gusty winds closed the route again last night. But as of this morning, it is now, yes, open to single-lane alternating traffic. It's a big relief, especially to tourism-dependent businesses in Tofino, Ucluelet, and Port Alberni that have been essentially cut off by the closure since June 6th.
We're hopeful that, with this news of the road open and the single lane alternating, and so far it seems like there's not long waits, that there's going to be that business come back for the end of June and beginning of July.
Calls are growing louder for the province to build an alternate route to and from the west coast of Vancouver Island. Ucluelet's mayor says this highway closure should be a wake-up call to the BC government. Well, keep watering to 1 day per week and do your part to conserve as much water as possible. That's the advice on the heels of a summer forecast predicting drought-like conditions right across much of the province.
In the summer period, when we see that bigger demand, that 50% increase, we know that's driven primarily by outdoor use. Given where we are right now, I think one of the biggest things, one of the most impactful things that you can do is to abide by the lawn watering restrictions and limit lawn watering to 1 day a week.
Recent rain has provided some relief in parts of BC, but it hasn't been enough to make up the deficit. If drought conditions worsen despite conservation measures, the province's temporary protection orders may be issued. And let's take a look at your latest forecast. I want to start with kind of a province-wide look at the forecast, and we'll look at the radar. You can see that low pressure system really moving quite quickly from the west to the east as it moves across BC. That's brought us that kind of mixed bag of weather. There's really no one-size-fits-all forecast for the province. We had those thunderstorm watches that turned into warnings right across from northern BC down through the Okanagan. So some patchy precipitation, some dramatic weather in some parts. Good news, yes, that precipitation, much needed rain in some parts, but also bad news, those lightning strikes. So we'll see. Hopefully those didn't cause too many new fires, if any, through those drier parts of the province. Here's tomorrow's forecast. You can see that'll largely continue through the southern Okanagan, the southern interior, and through the Kootenays. We'll see some chances of thunderstorms still as well. So more possible lightning strikes through there. Otherwise, largely mild through most of BC, except on the west coast. You'll see that spinning low coming off the Pacific, and that's going to give some rain to Prince Rupert, Port Hardy, really all along the central and north coast. I'll have more coming up in your full forecast at the end of the show. Well, for the first time in the city's history, Burnaby has proclaimed June Filipino Heritage Month. Today, more than 1,000 people, including the Premier, turned up at Burnaby Civic Square to mark the 125th anniversary of Philippine independence. As our Janella Hamilton tells us, it was also a chance for the community to weigh in on the highly anticipated Filipino Cultural Center.
From a cultural parade to traditional Filipino music and dancing. William Canero says the large turnout at Burnaby's Pinoy Festival illustrates the need for a dedicated space for BC's rapidly growing Filipino population.
By the last census, 75% of us weren't born in this country. Those are newcomers who have different needs than the rest of Canada.
One way to meet those needs is through a Filipino Cultural Center, a development the community has been urging the province to build for the past 50 years. 6 months ago, Premier David Eby instructed BC's Tourism, Arts and Culture Minister to prioritize the project, a glimmer of hope for those who fear the redevelopment of Vancouver's Joyce Collingwood neighborhood could threaten an important cluster of cultural spaces.
These restaurants, these businesses have acted as those cultural centers. There are languages, various Filipino languages spoken in these centers, in these restaurants, and that's rare.
Donning a traditional Filipino outfit, Eby reaffirmed his promise to build a provincial cultural center.
I know how important it is for this community to get together and celebrate, how important it is for this community to have a cultural center.
More than 30 Filipino organizations are at this year's festival, honoring heritage and celebrating diversity.
It's a source of pride that we are seen, that we are honored, that we are, we are part of the community.
Alan Fernandez says Filipinos have a long history in BC, dating back to the 1880s, and that history needs to be preserved.
I want to show my children what rich culture they have from their nationality. They might be Canadian citizens, but they shouldn't lose the fact that they're still Filipino nationals.
Affordable Tagalog classes, maybe free Tagalog classes.
Over the summer, the public can weigh in on plans for the center. For Canero, it's one step closer to making a decades-long dream a reality. Janella Hamilton, CBC News, Burnaby.
Well, Vancouver's local trans community took a march today to demand equal rights.
A lot of times people are confused or scared about trans people, so we feel that this march gets trans people out in the open and see we're just people like everyone else, and we are deserving of rights and freedoms like everyone else.
Marchers say they want to highlight the plight of trans people globally. They highlight the rising number of hate crimes against the community. From bathroom bills to bans on hormone replacement therapy, they say there's a wave of transphobic legislation happening in countries around the world. A new Punjabi Canadian sitcom is all about family, love, and laughter. It's called Our Big Punjabi Family, and it puts Abbotsford and Canadian talent in the spotlight. Our Beneet Braich spoke to the lead writer and actor about the comedy.
Our Big Punjabi Family is a new sitcom following a multi-generational family living in Abbotsford.
From Vancouver to Abbotsford.
Therapist Sitara and her family are forced to move in with her Punjabi in-laws after they lose all their money in a bad investment scheme.
We have Lena Monroe, who's the writer of the show. Love, laughter, chaos, all under one family roof. What do you want people to take away from this show?
People to take more empathy and kindness. What you're going to see in this show is a lot of love, despite the fact that they all live together. And I think we need to model kind and loving families for younger generations. It's something pretty special that South Asian families do live together. That's changing now. Maybe it doesn't have to change.
She says the show is unique, using both Punjabi and English languages.
Are you mad?
Of course not.
The moment your language dies, your culture kind of dies, doesn't it? This one is like English, Canadian mockumentary. There's none of those. This is the first one of its kind in all of North America, and I have seen multiple generations sit in the same room and enjoy the show. It made my heart so happy.
The show was mostly shot in Saskatchewan, but includes footage of Abbotsford.
Now we have Arshdeep Purba, who plays the mom in the show. I noticed that a lot of the roles here were Punjabi female-driven roles. What did that mean for you?
I feel like women in our culture, in our families, are not credited enough. So to be able to see how women-oriented this show was, I felt like was a gift to the moms.
Yeah, I know a lot of our families are first generation or multi-generational homes. So why did you think it was important for you to be part of this show?
I'm also first gen, and just seeing how my parents go about their life when they immigrated here, they have different morals, different values, different beliefs. And I think the show is also just showing the reality of living in a household with different generations, and how you can come to a level of understanding if you just come with communication and love.
Well, Vancouver's much celebrated Dragon Boat Festival returned for its 35th edition today. This year's competition features local artists and performers from BIPOC and LGBTQ+ communities. Almost 200 teams and 5,000 racers, including the CBC Wave Catchers, are paddling the waters of False Creek for this weekend's event. The festival aims to honor and uphold the relationship between Chinese and Indigenous communities. Well, to the Kootenays now, where one man and his canine are headed to Ireland this September to represent Canada at the 2023 World Sheepdog Trials. They'll be competing against more than 200 others for the world title, and as Corey Bullock explains, it's something the duo has been working on for years.
For George Stambulik and his border collie Sweep, running sheep is more than just a hobby.
When you have a dog that's been bred to do a job, you spend a lot of time with those dogs.
Stambulik has been working with border collies for 25 years. Last year, he and Sweep won the 2022 Canadian Reserve Nursery Trials in Alberta. Now they're headed to Ireland to represent Canada on the world stage.
It's a massive event, and I'm just hoping that I can do well for Canada.
Sweep is 6 years old. He won his first Canadian title at the age of 2, and Stambulik says their bond is like no other.
Dogs themselves are, if you get a bond with them and you're doing what they're bred to do, they latch on to that.
The first recorded sheepdog trials began in the 1800s in Wales. Today, there are hundreds of trials in the UK alone.
It's all work-based, and it shows all the aspects that shepherds would need to do their job.
Stambulik uses a series of commands to guide Sweep.
The commands that I use on Sweep are lie down, which doesn't necessarily mean to lie down. It's basically a stop command. Lie down. I'll say take time, which means to slow down and not push a sheep so hard. Watch.
Stambulik says it takes much more than just him and Sweep to be able to do the sport they both love.
I have lots of friends that are all pitching in to help out, and then of course my family.
And while Stambulik and Sweep prepare for the competition, they hope more British Columbians will learn about this unique sport and maybe even compete with them. Corey Bullock, CBC News, Cranbrook.
Still to come, the Canadian sea vessel Polar Prince makes a return, but questions linger following the tragedy at sea. We'll have that story when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. Let's take you to the other coast now. And St. John's Harbour was the scene of a mournful return today as the support ship for the ill-fated Titan submersible sailed into port. With the latest on the disaster that has made headlines around the world, here's the CBC's Travis Danrush.
There are certainly growing questions about what exactly happened to the Titan and also the Polar Prince. That is the Canadian flagged vessel, which is now back in the harbor here in St. John's. And it actually was the vessel that tugged Titan out to that spot in the Atlantic where it tried to dive to the wreck of the Titanic. We now know that the TSB, the Transportation Safety Board, they will be investigating this. They'll be leading the investigation into the Polar Prince and also a Titan. We also know that there are questions about the timeline here. The Department of National Defense confirmed that they knew from the U.S. Navy that there was underwater sonar that had detected some sort of anomaly that sounded like an explosion or an implosion on Sunday. So certainly a lot of questions about when exactly this happened, and that might be an indication as to the exact timeline on this. So all of this is going to be combed through over the next coming months, but certainly a lot of questions. We had a chance to speak to one former investigator with the Transportation Safety Board. Here's what he said.
It's not identifying any responsible party, but trying to find out and dig out the different phases of the that led to this catastrophe, this disaster, so that you're able to improve and identify these different items.
There are also, of course, growing concerns about OceanGate and whether or not what they did in terms of this expedition was safe. There had been questions from experts in the oceanographic community for years, really, leading back to 2018, where a joint letter was put out basically telling Stockton Rush that this mission and the construction of Titan was not sound. It did not meet their standards, at least, saying that the carbon fiber hull was not the correct material to use. So there will be a lot of questions about that, but people are, of course, still remembering Stockton Rush and the other victims that were on board. I had a chance to speak to one woman earlier who was here in St. John's laying flowers as a memorial.
If you live by the sea long enough, you witness tragedy after tragedy. And it's kind of a cumulative thing, but this was a tragedy that did not have to happen.
And also in the coming days, another vessel is expected here in St. John's, that carrying wreckage from the Titan. Travis Stanreich, CBC News, St. John's.
Let's take you overseas now. It appears the biggest threat to Russian President Vladimir Putin in more than 2 decades of power has been diffused. The Wagner Group has ordered a convoy headed for Moscow to turn back to their bases in Ukraine. They were on a mission to attack the leadership of Russia's military. The CBC's Briar Stewart reports on the apparent mercenary mutiny and what may have cut it short.
The roadblocks were up and police appeared to be manning machine gun positions on the outskirts of Moscow. But late today, an apparent and abrupt about-face. Wagner leader Yevgeny Prigozhin announced his men were turning around and going back to base camp in order to avoid bloodshed. He said the sudden reversal came after negotiations with Belarusian leader Alexander Lukashenko, who's considered to be a political puppet of Vladimir Putin, who many believe is now much more vulnerable.
I don't see how Putin survives this, because Putin would be so weakened by having to make an agreement with a guy who basically openly challenged him.
Over the past day, there's been a series of dramatic developments which led some to believe Russia could be on the verge of a coup or even a civil war. Still others believed it would all sort itself out. I think some sort of negotiations will take place, said this man. Our authorities will take all necessary actions. Early this morning, Wagner fighters appeared to easily sweep into the southern city of Rostov-on-Don, about 100 kilometers from Ukraine. Prigozhin published video of himself talking to a senior military official, demanding that the Minister of Defense and another top general be handed over because of their corruption and incompetence. Russia accused Prigozhin of mutiny.
А то, с чем мы столкнулись, это именно предательство.
What we're facing now is treason. Unreasonable ambitions and personal interests lead to treachery, said President Putin. The Kremlin says criminal charges against Prigozhin have been dropped and he will go to Belarus. As for the Wagner fighters, if they participated in the march, officials say they won't face prosecution and the rest will sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. Briar Stewart, CBC News, London.
You're looking at a live shot of the Port of Vancouver. It was a turbulent weather day across much of the province. Thunderstorm warnings have since lifted, but how much good did that rain really do in the interior? We'll have your 5-day forecast next.
Hi, I'm Amy Bell, and here's what's in your CBC Vancouver inbox.
CBC Vancouver is the premier media partner of the 2023 Surrey Fusion Festival, July 22nd and 23rd. Visit the festive cultural pavilions, enjoy free live music and family activities. And the 13th annual Indian Summer Festival takes place July 6th to the 16th. The festival's powerful 10-event lineup speaks to the theme of interdependence. Tickets at indiansummerfest.ca.
And let's take a look at our 5-day forecast. We'll start with the current temperatures around the region. It was a relatively nice day, actually relatively seasonal is what I should be saying. Not quite as nice as yesterday in many parts, but you can see still 15 at YVR. Very similar throughout the Lower Mainland, right along the south coast. Will stay pretty mild overnight. And then tomorrow, here's a look at the forecast. We can see the spotty showers continue through some parts, but the bulk of those unstable air masses have moved on. So for the most part, we'll see, highs of low 20s for the Lower Mainland. That's a couple degrees warmer than what we should be at for this time of year. The dry weather, unfortunately, will continue. Any of that precipitation that we saw in parts of BC, likely not enough to make a big difference with any of those drought-like conditions where it is extremely dry. But here's the 5-day forecast for Metro Vancouver. We'll see quite a bit of sunshine this week. For tomorrow, 22 degrees, mainly sunny. As we said, normal highs for this time of year around 19 degrees. So we are still a little bit warmer than normal. Overnight lows are right around seasonal, so not too bad there. But overall, looking like a pretty uneventful weather work week to start our week tomorrow. And that is your late news for this Saturday. For news at any hour, of course, you can always check out our website. We are at cbc.ca/BC. Your next local newscast is on North by Northwest on CBC Radio 1. That starts tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. Have a great night.